Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track. It's America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian, that's Rob. We're happy you're here today. Rob, tell everyone what they can appreciate coming up in this episode.
Well, today we're going to try and keep things short and sweet around news and social and Silverstone preview because we've got an action-packed show. We've got an interview with Blake, who is an ex-performance engineer, spent 10 years working at Force India and Red Bull. So that's going to be the majority of the show. We caught up with him earlier this week and it was a great time. Really enjoyed it, Brian.
Amazing, guys. So much fun. You guys are going to love this interview.
So let's crack on and get through news and social, which thankfully wasn't a huge amount of it this week, being as we don't want to burn too much time on it. The first thing that caught my eye, and it was the first thing I wrote down in the notes because it happened fairly early on in the week, was the alleged powwow of all the team principals that gathered after Canada, and it kind of sounded like bit of a schoolyard, he said, she said, and kind of throwing insults at each other. But what it really boiled down to is that people are suspicious that Mercedes got some kind of tip-off ahead of the new regs that were coming in, because I didn't even realise this when we did our review, but apparently they ran that car with some extra second stabiliser underneath the car or something that was now allowed under the new regulations to reduce the bouncing, and they were able to MacGyver this together in like less than 24 hours notice, and all the other teams are going, there's no way you managed that in 24 hours.
On a Formula One car, which gets tested ad nauseum in wind tunnels and everywhere, and they were able to we're supposed to assume they just took the thing and then welded it onto the side of the car and then said, yeah, that'll work.
Chewing
gum. No way. There's no way. Like, no way. They just took it and they go, oh, it's illegal now. Where do you want to put it? I don't know. Over here? And they duct taped it on like Yuki's rear wing and they called it a day. There's no way. That doesn't make any sense.
And then just to add fuel to the fire, and this probably has got nothing to do with it, but if you wear your cynical hat, you look at it and go, which, by the way, that's the noise you make when you're cynical.
I was going to say, is that the noise as you put the tinfoil onto your head that your hat is made of? But I agree, this is also looks bad, so you got to say it.
So, Shaila Ann Rao, if I've said that right, is the former executive of Mercedes that has left and been appointed at a temporary role in the FIA since the beginning of June. And that's what these accusations are saying is you got some little kind of text message from your insider saying you might want to start considering looking at some kind of stabilizer bar because there might be something coming. I'd like to think that didn't happen. But like you say, the fact they pulled this out of the fire with like a minute's notice is a bit...
It's
anyway.
Weird. It doesn't look good. So after the race, there was a lot of conversation last week about Max hitting his 150th GP in Canada. And obviously he's been wildly successful, world champion. And someone at F1 published a graphic that made its way around Twitter. And it was Fernando, and it was Lewis, and it was Seb, and it was Max after their first 150 races. And the internet and F1 Twitter went crazy for comparing Lewis and Max and why one's better than the other and why the other one sucks. And so it was on and on and on. And what was being missed was that Seb far outpointed everybody after 150 races. Like, he's right there in the graphic. And they're like, well, yeah, Max is better than Lewis better than Max, on and on. Seb, most wins of all of them, Seb, 41, 7 more than Lewis. Most podiums, Seb, 1 more than Lewis, 73. Most poles, Seb, 45, 5 more than Lewis. Most fastest laps, Seb, 24, 3 more than Lewis. Most world titles after 150 races, Seb, 4, twice as many as Fernando and Lewis and 3 more than Max. But everyone was up in arms about Max and Lewis. You're missing the point. The point is the greatness of Seb.
Can you not bring facts and well-rounded arguments into a Lewis versus Max debate, please? It's not welcome here.
I should not do that. I mean, all of those guys are amazing drivers. I didn't mention enough about Fernando. He has some amazing stats there, too. It was crazy. But speaking of people who have driven for Ferrari, why don't we talk a little bit about what Mattia Binotto had to say, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I am the eternal optimist, and I am hoping there's a Ferrari fight back on the way before the break so that we've got something to look forward to as a good end to the season. And we all saw signs kind of chasing down Max and felt maybe if that had been Leclerc in that car, he might have got him. But there was apparently some reason to maybe that pace that kept them in touch with Red Bull and why it might be better in the hands of Leclerc is that they actually brought a new wing, an upgrade package to Montreal, and a rear wing specifically designed for closing the top speed gap to Red Bull. So, maybe cautiously optimistic here that if that Ferrari can plug that speed gap and Leclerc doesn't have to start from the back of the grid, and Ferrari doesn't blow up, and they don't mess up the strategy,
So it's a sure thing. Sure thing, you're saying. Put him in your lineup now for the British GP.
Yeah, and then it'd be remiss of us not to give a very small bit of airtime, but we will, to what made the news everywhere was F1 Red Bull reserve driver Vips. Strange surname, but there we are. Vips,
Yuri Vips
has been suspended over a racial slur he made during a gaming stream. So that is what it is. Probably got a lot more column inches and coverage than it seemed to go crazy on Twitter. But, just because you're away from your job and you're deciding to stream stuff online, you can't be doing those kind of things. And the internet is always watching, so...
Well, I mean, you don't just casually drop the N-word is the other thing. So that either you use it regularly or you don't ever. So he obviously uses it. Anyway, Pierre signed AlphaTauri 2023, first domino in the silly season. He really had nowhere to go. I mean, what better team had a spot open for him? So I'm excited Pierre will be at AlphaTauri. And get a chance to kind of continue to bond with Yuki if they keep Yuki and kind of watch what happens. Pukey, hashtag Pukey, we love it. ESPN, big news. Just recently was announced they won the rights for Formula One in the States. And so it was a bidding war. And I gotta just highlight one thing real fast. For the last 3 years, ESPN has been paying $5 million a year for the right to show the Sky Sports feed and to share it in the States, to have that ownership. $5 million a year. The new deal, they're paying $75 to $90 million a year. That is, you want to talk about inflation? I'm done complaining about the gas prices. If they were like, hey, $5, $5, $80, like what happened? And that's with $1 million. Like, holy cow. They beat out Amazon, who had a higher bid apparently, but was really trying to sub-license it to other broadcasters as well. Comcast was going in heavy with Peacock, which apparently turned them off a little. And then Netflix came in lower on the money. So congratulations to ESPN. Awesome. I love the coverage as it is now. Can't wait for it to continue. And then last couple things just before we get to the interview. One of my favorite tweets of the week, I have to highlight it. Sky Sports F1 put out the greatest F1 driver to have never won a Grand Prix was ... And then Nick Heidfeld replied with Nick Heidfeld.
Yeah.
And so I almost peed my pants laughing. For everyone who does not know, Nick Heidfeld has run the second most GPs without a win in the history of Formula One, behind Andrea De Cesaris, or De Crasheris, as he's also known. Heidfeld, 183 started GPs, never finished first. He did finish second. So for him to get on there and go, me, I thought that was classy and quality. A couple videos to highlight. I noticed this. I'd never seen this before. So if people have been watching this and not telling me about it, then shame on you. But Ferrari puts out a race beats after each race, or at least has this year. Again, I'd never seen it before the Canadian Grand Prix, or I guess after the Canadian Grand Prix. And it's just an animated recap of the Ferrari race. It is fun to watch. It's just the Ferrari cars. It's animated, and you kind of see as they're progressing through the race where they're going, who they're racing, and it's got some music to it. And I'm like, all right, rock on, Ferrari. So check that out.
They have to do something to add some sparkle to it, being as they're not doing it actually in the race at the moment.
Well,
right?
The strategists, when they're not working on the strategy during the race, they work on the race beats on the side. Like, should we have changed tires?
I was going to say, or maybe they're too busy doodling for the cartoon and forgetting that. Oh, hang on a minute, did we just double stack them by mistake?
Yeah, we told him to come in? Oh, he's here? One more Ferrari note. You guys know I love the teammates who seem to have chemistry, and I already talked about hashtag Pukey. The C-Squared Challenge, it was called Feeling 22 with Carlos and Charles. It was recorded before the season, a little bit about what they knew about the upcoming season. It was fun. It was okay. But the big winner of the week, and I tweeted this out just recently, you have to go watch it if you have not seen it. It is the F1 game rating reveal. It is gold. It is so great. It is, you get Haas, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Red Bull, McLaren, Alpine. It is fantastic because they go through each of the components of the driver scores, and the teammates reveal each other's scores. And they guess first. So it's not just a straight reveal. They go, oh, what do you think about Daniel's racecraft? And Lando's like, well, it's all right. And so the point is, and I just kind of highlighted this, McLaren, oh my God. It was, we've talked on this here channel many times about the relationship that does not seem to have developed yet between Daniel and Lando. And who knows? We're on the outside in, right? So big caveat. What do we know? But every time they release a video, and every time we talk about it, we talk about how awkward the relationship feels, especially coming off the bromance of Carlando. So I watched this, and Lando is clearly, visibly getting pissed from the way Daniel keeps giving him low scores. They finally get to racecraft, and Lando writes for Daniel. They go, what do you think for Daniel? And he writes, and it's hard to tell. Let's say it's 2019 or 2012, doesn't matter. It's the past. He writes 94, which is a really high score. It's out of 100. But then he writes for 2022, 34. You have to understand, there's no scores under like a 60 of anything for anybody. Like Latifi's ability to avoid crashes is above a 60. He gave Daniel a 34 on racecraft this year. Daniel was so angry, and like he tried to laugh it off and walk out. Oh my God, I think I would have punched him in the face. I mean, so go watch. You got to watch. It is epic. And on that, we are very excited to launch into the interview with Blake. So excited he came on the channel. We just recorded it a couple of days ago. Hope everyone enjoys it as much as we did talking to Blake.
Well, hey, right, we're super excited now to get an interview with an ex-F1 employee. We've been hunting him down on Twitter for a while, and it is our great pleasure to welcome Blake from Brrrake F1. I swore I was going to say that the wrong way around, but welcome to the dirty side of the track, Blake.
How's it going?
It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time.
No, thank you guys.
So as we were kind of like looking in this and kind of pulling together the backstory of Blake, just want to see if we've got this kind of synopsis right. So you're from Texas, you moved to the UK to pursue your F1 dream, where eventually you made it into Force India and then Red Bull and spent essentially, I think, 10 years in F1, right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and we...
And that's the end of the interview.
No.
So no, yeah, okay, yeah, I am that childish. I'm sorry. So let's just wind that right back to the beginning. How does a guy from Texas end up getting into F1 back then, and B, deciding he needs to move to the UK to go and pursue that dream?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because like the whole idea is like, well, I'd like to leave everything I know. I lived in Texas all my life until I was 25, 26, and then at that point I was like, I need to move to the UK because I want to pursue motorsport engineering. I want to get a job in Formula One. That was the end goal. And now looking back on that, Formula One's not the be all to end all. There's so many other amazing motorsport series out there. But I was dead set on Formula One. And it kind of like, if I boil it back down to the essence or whatever kicked the whole thing off, it was my dad's buddy had a Spec MX-5 race car. And he's like, hey, I've graduated. I've got a new Mustang. I'm doing track days and races with this. Do you and your dad want to drive this MX-5? I was like, yeah, go on. Why not? And so that was kind of it, man. And it's like, as soon as I sniffed it's like that. It's like, as soon as I sniffed the race fuel, smelled the tires, it's like, okay, I'm interested in this. And it was like, okay, I enjoyed driving. I, had some okay runs at a club level. And then it was like, cool, I want to make this thing go faster. How does that work? That led into mechanical engineering because those are the most closely related. That led into Formula SAE or Formula Student, as it's called in Europe. I started getting into Formula One. And I was like, hey, this stuff looks really cool. I think I could do that. And people were like, you're crazy. You like, there's no Formula One here. I asked some advice from some good friends, and they were like, yeah, why don't you just like, I'd applied to NASCAR teams, IndyCar teams, and like, well, you need experience. I was like, well, how the heck am I going to get experience?
It's the chicken and the egg. Yeah. Where do I get it from?
So I basically I pulled together some cash, and I was like, right, I'm going to full send on going to the UK for a year to do a motorsport degree, a master's degree, and see what happens. I finally I stole some poor kid's internship at Force India, and they paid me peanuts. And shortly thereafter, they promoted me to a junior engineer. But that's how it got started. So.
Well, sorry, one second. How do you steal someone's internship? What did you? Well, that sounds very underhand there, Blake.
Yeah, it was kind of nasty. No, long story short, it was an internship which was designed for second-year students. And I, being a master's graduate student, I was like, listen, I don't care what it is. I just want my foot in the door. Give me a shot. And they're like, okay, cool. The paycheck sucks. I was like, that's okay. I can borrow some more money. And that was basically it. So then that kicked it off. And then very shortly later, I think the weird part about the story is like about 8 months into that job, I was like, I saw the head of race engineering in the canteen. I was like, hey man, what do I need to do to be a race engineer or, performance engineer at the track? And he was like, get in line. I was like, okay. Okay. And then 2 months later, one of the guys left on short notice and like, hey, about that test coming up next week. You got a passport? I was like, oh yeah, I got a passport. And that kicked off me, traveling for 6 years, with Force India at first, and then to Red Bull for 3 years. And that was, that was like the super shortcut version of how to be performance engineer at F1. I was like, I just got here and I'm at the track now. It's extremely atypical, and it doesn't usually work like that. I know guys have been waiting in line 5-6 years to go to the track. So small team, right time, right place.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're literally right place, right time. Someone leaves, and you happen to be in the canteen getting a coffee, and they went, "Yeah, send that guy on the plane."
Well, I mean, the ability, confidence, and desire, and what you did to get there, to put yourself in the position to have that little bit of luck. I mean, that alone speaks to, everybody's desire to achieve anything. You have to really go for it. And that's amazing. I mean, the fact that, because if you had not done all that, you wouldn't have had that luck. And so, I mean, it's tremendous.
People say, I say I got lucky. People say you make your own luck, but I just happened to be the least worst person for the job at the time.
Which is
I'm
funny
okay
when
with that, honestly, because it's when you get into that situation, imagine somebody throws you in a new job and you're not used to the environment, you're not used to the tools, you're not used to the people. It's sink or swim. And that is the ultimate motivator. Because
So what are you doing on day one when you rock up? You got your passport, you get on the plane, you go there. What is day one on the job for you at the track?
the day one of the job at the track is figuring out the software systems that you're using, figuring out the language, getting to know the race engineer, which I'd worked with him a little bit in the simulator before, which was fine. So it wasn't like, hey, what's your name? But day one on the job is like, it was Mugello tire test in 2012. It was the first time we've been to Mugello in a while. And the goal was basically to set up day, make sure everything's good. The other guys, showed me what to do. And then most of it is literally make sure the car doesn't catch on fire. It sounds stupid. It sounds crazy. And you see, I've never seen a car catch on fire, but literally, like, performance engineer looks after brake temperature management. At that time, it was KERS management. So managing the harvest maps, managing the deployments, fueling the car, telling the fuel man how much fuel to put in the car for the run. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And it's like, that's a lot of responsibility. Don't put enough fuel in the car stops. Put too much brake blinking on, the car catches on fire, which did actually happen at one point. It's not my proudest moment. And that's kind of where the name Brrrake kind of started as well. I got the name Brake Tape for a while because I ended up burning the rear axle off of one of the old Force Indias at a test a year later. But it happens.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what happened? How much did that cost? Yeah, that was about $300,000.
Oh.
Ouch.
But then
they were paying me so much at that time that it didn't really hurt.
Yeah, you just took it out of your paycheck, right?
Yeah, that was only going to take me about 50 years to make that much money.
When you've got nothing to lose.
Exactly.
So then, like, help us understand the progression of your time at Force India and then into Red Bull at the track. Did you have kind of the similar role of, let's make sure the temperatures, the settings are correct, let's not let the car catch fire? And were you trackside during races? And if so, like, were you on like the pit wall, like as you see there, or were you in the garage? Like, what was your setup?
So at Force India, I was in the garage, and we were back in the back. We called them the racks because they were actually some like IT racks with slide out keyboards and monitors, and you had your laptop which docked in there. But at Red Bull, I was always in the garage. So I look back, like I'll go back and watch old races, and I'll see myself standing in the garage talking to Kvyat or Verstappen at the time. So I mean, so I went from Force India to Red Bull, and I left there to be Vettel's performance engineer. He interviewed me. Him and Rocky were in my interview for the job. And then obviously, Seb goes to Ferrari the year, and Kvyat joins the team. But like a lot of that job is basically tools around the car, brake balance, differential, performance analysis, feedback. So when the car is running on track, you're making sure brakes are working well, everything's happy, fuel consumption, and then you're also doing a lot of performance analysis. So looking at the driver compared to himself, the driver compared to his teammate, and offering like immediate real-time feedback to the race engineer to say, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm thinking. and because the race engineer's on the pit wall and he's monitoring tire pressures, he's looking at lap times, he's looking at gaps to make sure the driver has clean air to do his practice runs or qualifying run or race. So it's like this thing where the race engineer can do all that, but he's not doing that. So I'm, in his ear every couple laps saying, hey, I've noticed this. Here's some suggestions for things that the driver has access to do. Or, by the way, you're losing out to your teammate in turn 10 on the brakes or the exit. So you're always feeding them these loops of, and then the race engineer kind of thinks about that. And he's like, what's the most important thing to feed the driver at the time? And it's a pretty cool loop because it's a back and forth and you'll challenge each other a little bit, but not too much because, he's got to make sure he's aware of the strategy, he's aware of gaps. If it's a qualifying lap and the driver's on a slow lap, he's like, hey, so-and-so's coming up behind you quick. And if you're busy telling him a message, it takes 20 minutes to tell him, he's going to be like, yeah, I missed that. And he's in the bin now. So, oops.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like trackside performance. That's kind of like what that job felt like.
So two kind of follow-on questions from that then. Well, one's probably more a statement of fact, which is then, so when we hear on TV people saying the race radio, the in-car radio saying you're losing out to your teammate or to the leader on corners 5, 7, and 12, that's essentially you. You're looking at that telemetry
Yes.
and basically looking at that and saying this is where you're losing the time, right?
Yeah. The performance engineer will often be feeding that info to the race engineer because the race engineer's primary capacities are, a lot of other higher level stuff where the performance engineer is like in the bits and pieces and the details and saying, by the way, you're losing out here. And the race engineer conveys that, exactly that.
So are you involved? So are you completely impartial to the strategy that's being deployed by the team and you're just there just to monitor telemetry and feed that back? Or are you looking at the telemetry have you all kind of had a big powwow at the beginning of the weekend, whether it's the setup for practice or quali? Do you have the strategy in mind so that you can look at the telemetry and make those observations, or are you supposed to not have those observations and let other folk worry about that? You just report the stats.
I think for the most part, it's the strategy. You go into the weekend with a plan, right? And you're like, this is our plan. This weekend, let's say we're going to do a one stop. And so for the performance engineer and the race engineer, you're thinking like, right, what can I observe about the longevity of the tires? How are they behaving? Are we putting more energy in than we expected? Are we putting less? Fueling strategy, it's like, right, well, if we're doing a one stop, that means we're probably going to save quite a bit of fuel because the pace is going to drop off massively on the stint. So you're like, okay, I can play with the fuel margins a little bit. So it's a back and forth, and every now and then, the strategy should be like, how are the tire energies? It's like, well, they're on target or they're above target. So, maybe we might see some deg, and that feed forward will get them thinking, okay, well, do we need to convert to a 2 now or not? Do we need to convert to a 2 stop? So it's a back and forth. You try to usually stick to the plan, but yeah, it's always like, people think strategists know everything, but the system is so chaotic. It's you observe data, you make predictions, and then you observe in real time what's happening and adapt to it as it comes. And there's the plan goes out the window as soon as you leave the grid.
So I have to ask this question, and if you get mad at me, just don't answer it. But the people you mention so far, Seb and Kvyat, there's a famous interaction between them where Daniel kind of came in hot on a corner, and Seb called him the torpedo. And did you?
It's a classic. That one.
It is a classic. It's one of my favorites of all time. And the question for you, Blake, is: were you as a performance engineer, were you looking at that corner and did you order a torpedo to the race engineer?
Nah, I didn't say it. I didn't say deploy a torpedo now. I did happen to suggest a brake balance map that pulled a whole lot of front out. So he just kind of, no, I didn't do that. No. Yeah,
that is one of my favorite cool down room moments.
Classic.
Oh, absolute classic. I have the soundboard.
To be
of
honest,
that here. Yeah.
they actually need to bring the microphones back into cool down room because the last couple of races they've been cutting us out. I'm like,
yes,
okay, bleep the swearing out. That's fine. I don't mind. But like, I want to hear those exchanges. What are they talking about? Like, I know we've just watched these guys pound around for 70 laps, but I'm a bit of a dork. I want to hear what they're
I do
talking
too.
about.
No, I am as well. And when they brought it back, it was like a surprise. Like 3 or 4 races ago, all of a sudden you see the cool down room. I was like, cool down room's back, but you couldn't hear a thing, and like a little bit of it. And now that they're showing on the TVs more sort of highlights of the race, you have the drivers talking about it more. And so
I think that's cool.
I do
like,
too.
hey, look at that dummy. Look what he did. Yuki, what are you doing in the barrier? Oh, rip.
Oh, by the way, okay then. So just something I never even thought of before talking to you is, so we hear team radio. We hear, let's say Lewis say, my tires have gone. I've got no grip. Did the race engineer come back to you and say, is he talking BS? And then you look at the telemetry and going, yeah, there's nothing wrong. He's just making excuses. I mean, is there that back the other way where you're able to analyze if what the driver is reporting is true?
I think for the most part, like, I don't think the drivers have much motivation to BS about it. I think for the most part, if the tires are actually dead, we've been looking at the balance metrics, which is like you basically combine the steering and the yaw rate and the acceleration of the car, and you're like, okay, this signature looks like, yeah, that the rear tires are going away, or the front tires are, falling off, or we've got graining or something. You can usually see that, and by the time the driver's talking about it, yeah, you're kind of right there with him. You're not ahead of him. You're not predicting it, but yeah. And if he is, if I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? I might say that with a race engineer, but he's not going to come on the radio and be like, hey, Max, you're lying.
We know your radio's working. You just don't want to talk to us.
Yeah, I'm pissed off that you dropped me behind, Lewis.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, you should have pushed more, man.
That was good.
But like those are the good kind of exchanges. Like, you have a temper, and then you have a calm response, and people get mad, and like the drivers shouldn't be upset. I'm like, just let them drive the car. Like, we actually thrive off that kind of drama. So why don't we just enjoy it? Yeah, he's swearing or he's upset. It doesn't bother me. Let it happen. This is great. This is great television.
I mean, and their competitive juices are flowing. You're going 200 some odd miles an hour around corners and 150 around tighter corners, and your concrete walls coming at you, and you're fighting for position. I mean, these guys, like, of course, there's going to be some F-bombs coming out and some passion. I would hope.
I hope so. So. And if there's not any passion, then what's going on? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sunday drive?
Yeah, seriously. So then
I'm not talking about Charles, by the way.
Yeah, we won't. That's. I feel bad. So the way that's gone down the last couple of weeks. But so the question for you, another one, just as we're kind of getting a feel for your time in F1. Then at the last, I think you said 3-4 years at Red Bull, you were the sim performance engineer.
Yeah.
And so what does that entail? Is that how different is that compared to what you'd been doing before?
It's quite a bit different. Whereas at the track, I was very focused on a single car on a weekend to weekend basis, right? So it's like, right, so we're going to an event. I've got the pre-event simulations. I go look at my notes from last year. I'm looking at the sims from aero, from which rear wing we're going to put on the car, from suspension. I'm building the maps for the performance maps for the car, like the differential and the brakes, looking at the fuel consumption numbers. And that's like a rinse repeat every week. And it's 20, 21, 22, 23 races a year. I was like, right, I don't love being at the track that much. But what I do love is data analysis and, finding out how to make the car go faster. It's like, why don't I go back to the track? Why don't I go back to the factory in a development role where I can look at, for example, in the simulator world, which is great thing is before the new car comes out, you're getting aero maps from the wind tunnel. You're getting aero maps from CFD. You got new tire model stuff coming from Pirelli. You've got some test data. You've got a new suspension, a new car, and you're putting all that together in the virtual world, making sure that it makes sense, first of all, which is very important to check that these things make sense before you test them. And then you get a test driver or a race driver, and you say, right, well, we know last year's car. We know that behaves well in the sim. We know that behaves close to reality. We have good correlation. Now let's start changing these bits and start developing next year's car. And that's the holy grail. And then taking all that and say, right, well, we're at the track, we're turning lots of laps and generating infinite amounts of data, which is effectively untapped. Some of it's turned into information, but most of the data exists as data. So one of the other big things I was super excited about being back at the factory was spending lots of time developing tools and methods to boil data down into useful information to help make better decisions. And that was what I was most passionate about. So yeah, in the sim, I still would race engineer a car in the virtual world, make a test plan. How are we going to do? Talk to other people, collaborate, build a plan that was effective at understanding, that thing we're testing. And then, running the session, talking to the driver, making sense of the feedback, validating that with the data, checking that it checks out, flagging things that don't check out, and then preparing a report that summarized all that for the other people to consume. So that was kind of like simulator life for me in 2 minutes.
Well, I mean, so it's obvious then the entire success of the Red Bull team over the last handful of years has been built through that work in the simulator. I mean, effectively, you should have a trophy at this point, yes?
I left in November before the final race, and a lot of people didn't like that race, and I don't blame them. But
So did you work a lot in the simulator, though, and obviously on the brand new car, then the new regs?
yeah, I did quite a bit of that. But it was it was also at that time it was also relatively early stages of the new regs. So a lot of the stuff that you see now is completely foreign to me, and all the stuff that we were dealing with when I was still there in September, October, November was still very hypothetical stuff. But it's probably not too far.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say hypothetical that it didn't predict the porpoising then in the simulator.
No, I don't remember that being a factor at all. But clearly, this is a thing that like ground effect cars are notorious for having is this oscillatory, cyclic aerodynamic attachment, reattachment, and balance shifting. And some of the teams went very hard down a certain path, and that path was met by one big giant porpoise.
Oh man. So I guess I'd ask, that's of all those years in Formula One, from Force India to Red Bull and from your different roles, what are a couple things that really stand out to you, something a high and a low, or something that you look back fondly on or embarrassingly on that you might want to share? But just out of curiosity, what are some of your favorite memories?
I think that's the trifecta there. You've got the high, the low, and the embarrassing.
Yeah,
and I think
I live my life amongst all those daily. So
I have no problem owning up to the embarrassing as well. So we've already told one embarrassing story about setting the car on fire and testing, which I debate was not entirely my fault, and other people were warned and they disregarded my advice as a performance engineer. They made the decision, said I wouldn't stop that car on the grid because those brakes, there's something wrong with them. I would do a cool down lap. Well, we stopped for a practice start and the whole thing caught on fire. No, it was fine. It was fine. My first race was Spain, 2012. So that was when Maldonado won that race, and the Williams garage caught on fire because an ERS pack went bottom up. Yeah, so that was a very, very weird weekend, first of all. But before qualifying, I'd had a lot of a very nice electrolyte drink because it was warm. And
oh boy,
sorry, this was Sunday. This was Sunday before the race. Sorry, it wasn't qualifying. In qualifying, I messed up the fuel in the car, which is pretty important. My race engineer GP saved my butt then. And then Sunday, I had a lot of this really nice electrolyte drink, and I was like, I looked to my buddy David, and I was like, David, I've got to leave my desk. I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm gonna have to go to the hospital. And he's like, you can't leave during the race. I'm like, just cover for me. And I ran out the back and go to the bathroom, and like, I'm monitoring the race fuel lap by lap. I was gone for half a lap, but still, I was like, if the race engineer to come on the intercom, say, hey, did you see this? But that was my first race. I was useless anyway, so I was like, I got to go for a bathroom break, or otherwise I'm gonna hurt myself. That was pretty embarrassing.
A lot of dead air if they start asking for you while you're out back.
I was like, David, cover for me. It's fine. He's like, yeah, he's got an intercom issue. Sure. So that was kind of like that was a pretty embarrassing thing. And other than that, it was like, getting a couple races in and realizing I was the only one like really, really hungover on Friday morning. I was like, you guys we're not living the good life here. And they're like, yeah, we are. We can hold our alcohol. It's like, no. Wacky stuff was like Force India being invited onto VJ's yacht. You're thinking this is Formula One. You're in Monaco, and VJ's got his super yacht out there, the Indian Princess it was called, and he's having these huge parties. And because Monaco, there's no session on Friday. So Thursday night, after you finish free practice 1 and free practice 2, you go back to your hotel, you get cleaned up, and then you go get smashed up on VJ's boat. that was just funny and weird. It's like, what are all these rich people doing? I'm pretty sure this isn't your money, and bad things might happen to you in the future. But yeah. Oh, who's this buddy? Who's your friend Sahara? Oh, yeah, he's in jail now. Where's all that money gone? So that was like, whoa. I guess like the actual high was like the first race when I had in Formula One was Verstappen, Barcelona, when he joined the team. You know, it was his first weekend. So, you know, there was China, Kvyat's on the podium. Then there was Russia. He has a crap race. He smashes into Seb. All that happens. And they decide, right, we're going to swap you guys. And I show up to the office and Rocky's like, so Max will be here on tomorrow for the simulator session. He's driving your car for the rest of the season. We're like, okay.
Whoa.
It was like that. It was like overnight, the bosses made the decision. That's fine. There's nothing contentious about, like, that's what happened. And then he rocks up the race and he wins the damn thing. We're like, right. So I mean, clearly that Mercedes taking each other out was pretty spectacular. But you know what? You got to be the least worst on the day and take home some points and maybe a trophy. So that was cool. That was my first race win in the sport. The closest we had seen before that was Perez in Bahrain. So that was pretty special.
What was Max like then in those early days? Was there kind of like this obvious natural raw talent, or did you take a while to? I mean, obviously you won that first race, but what's he kind of like, and how much are you? I always get this impression, and I've probably got this wrong, that you've got the guys in the garage that are kind of all kind of having a bit of a laugh and a joke, and then there's you engineers and the people that sit on the pit wall. You're kind of higher level, right? You're kind of you're the intellectuals, and you don't get drawn down into the childish
Joker,
stuff.
Man.
But yeah, okay.
I'm the Joker.
So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, like the hierarchies, like the mechanics, the lads, the guys. You know, there's dudes, but like those guys are machines, man. They're absolutely insanely professional. Everything they do is to the highest degree. You know, the pit wall, your strategist, your race engineer, your team manager. Of course, you guys they're setting a precedent for the other guys. You know, they're not cutting up as much, but we have a laugh. And then the driver, like Max was just this new kid. You know, he was super young, and right away he was pretty quick. I think Daniel spanked him pretty good in qualifying, and he was like, "Yeah, we'll figure it out later." But then after that, he starts showing up to practice sessions in P1, and he's going out at 99% immediately. P1, no building up to it, nothing. You know, not like no wasting time. You know, he smashed up a couple front wings and floors early on in sessions, but he got to the limit super fast, and everybody noticed that very quickly, and it was spectacular, honestly.
And that's something you can see, I guess, then from the telemetry. Then you know the difference between a drive that takes a while to get up to the limit. So 99%. Then how do you know it's 99%? Stupid question time. I mean,
but it's like 99% of whatever they did, and for sure, like it was clear that Daniel was easing into the weekend, and all the other drivers I had seen before just kind of eased the weekend. By the time you roll out in qualifying, you know, you're chipping away, and you're probably no more than a tenth off your perfect sectors. You know, you put that lap together in qualifying, but this dude was just like, I'm going to find the limit in P1. I'll tell you what the problem is, and we'll get around it. And he ended up being very quick, very quickly, if that makes sense. And
it does.
I think the rest is history, and you see it. I think you have guys like that. You've got your Fernandos, you've got your Lewises, you've got your Maxes, and those guys are something else. And you know, a lot of what sets them apart is being able to deal with very adverse conditions. Like I remember Max's drive in Brazil in the wet. He's driving around Rosberg around turn, was it 3-4, and on the outside in the wet, you're like, this guy's on something else. And he was. And the car was good as well. It's the right car, the right characteristics that suit the driver. And as engineers, we often struggle to put a finger on that, what they like. We can guess what it is, and we can be like, well, we'll change this, and they don't like that, so I think that's what it is. But actually boiling it down and putting a number on or a metric on a characteristic that a driver likes is actually pretty difficult. Take, for example, drivers that struggle to their teammate. How do you describe that and then come up with fixes to fix that?
One of the things you always hear, one of the things you always hear about Schumacher, and I think probably Alonso and others, is that they're able to articulate what's not right with the car in the right language that you guys can act on. So they don't just say, "Oh, I'm struggling for speed." Oh, great, that really helps.
Yeah.
But they were able, They're so. Any drivers that you work with like that are kind of tuned into being able to tell you exactly what it is, or have you always had to do that kind of like trial and error approach to try to work out what the hell they're talking about?
Not really. I think for the most part, a lot of them were very good. Like all the guys I work with were very good. Some of them, you know, the best, like, I'll put it this way, rather than talk about anyone in particular, the best drivers are the ones that can tell you what they think is causing them to go slowly rather than telling you about all the problems they have. If that makes sense. Because like imagine you look, it's like, well, the car doesn't feel right in turn 9, a little bit of understeer in turn 10. It's like, no, stop. What is the alligator closest to the boat that we need to knock on the head? Oh, it's traction. It's like, well, you haven't even mentioned that yet. Cool. So the drivers that are able to get to the point and tell you exactly what is causing them the most problem to go faster, and that they can identify that instead of saying, well, all this stuff felt bad and this felt good, doesn't do anything. But like when you pinpoint that stuff, those drivers, and then as an engineer, you look at your toolbox of things you have, and it's like, well, okay, I can change that, but that hurts this. I've got this thing that fixes that and doesn't hurt anything else that much. You want to try that? Yeah, we tried that in the sim, and that should make sense. So you build up this database of like what you tried in the sim, and okay, this fixed this but made this worse. Then you go to the track and you apply that, and often it hits. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's the reality of simulation tools.
It's interesting. It's sort of like a Days of Thunder, like Cole Trickle effect, right? He couldn't speak the language with his pit boss, but once he could unlock a lot of it. Actually, one thing we do here on the dirty side is occasionally we will go highlight former, old drivers, and a couple of them over the past, we're only about 6 in so far, but a couple of them come to mind, especially back in the day, who grew up as mechanics. And the ability as a mechanic to really understand a lot of these things, like the Fangios and the people who knew how to tweak the car, like Lauda, and some of the background that they brought is just, it's interesting because you could almost see the success they had growing from their understanding of the car. So it is fascinating. Yeah.
There's 2 sides of that coin as well, because you don't want a driver who's slow and trying to race engineer the car themselves. Because if you have a driver that's slow and trying to race engineer the car himself, it's the chicken and the egg thing again. But it's like, if you have a driver that has good technical understanding and he knows what those things are doing and why they're doing that, and then he trusts you to pick the tools out of the box based on what he's told you to do, you end up getting in a very good, like a good rapport with like, right, I know my race engineer changes the right things, and you trust them for the most part. But yeah, the guys that have that technical understanding and the feel for it, we're probably not going to have too many of those anymore.
Yeah.
Well, but you might.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these guys coming through karting and all the series, but yeah, it's the same goes for designers, the super mega mind designers that revolutionize the designer concept. Everything's getting broken down into smaller and smaller, and everybody's getting super hyper focused. You got a guy that just does this bit, a guy that does this bit, and there's not like that one dude again, like your Adrians and your Ross Brauns. I think we're seeing the last of those guys, honestly. A little bit of a different direction, but yeah. Speaking of drivers, but even engineers, we're seeing the last of those, those soul dudes that made a huge impact on a team, a design, a concept, or a car.
What was the stat, Rob? We talked about this. I can't. Was it Adrian's 10th car to win at Monaco this year? Was that?
Yeah. It's his 10th car designed by him to win at Monaco, which is insane. Where you think that he's designed that many different cars, and they've all been able to pull it out the fire at Monaco, which is pretty cool. Just when you were just talking about kind of so the race engineer piece and kind of the feedback and getting the car set up for the weekend. Once you're locked and loaded and you're in Parc Fermé and you're sitting in there like Neo in front of the Matrix looking at all this data coming through on your telemetry. For the benefit of the audio here, we have some Neo action going on from Blake there. But what's the most that you can change? So you're seeing something's going wrong. What have you got in your toolbox that you can fix? Because we tend to hear on commentary brake balance. That's all we kind of hear. But there must be more to it than that. What are you able to give the drivers to make a difference on race day?
So on race day, for the most part, you've got a couple things. Tire pressures these days are so prescribed into a window. You don't have a whole lot of flexibility on them. You're probably going to try to start them as low as possible, and whatever you get to is whatever you get to. You might balance them out. So during the stint, the car's balanced. You've got flap angle on the front wing. That is one of your adjustment tools. You can pick that. You can change that through qualifying. You can change that for the start of the race relative to qualifying, and you can change that in pit stops. That's often changed in pit stops. We don't see it, but there's often somebody down there with a little gun changing the front wing angle and those little tiny little screws. Brake balance is a huge thing, and it's not just like you look at a race car and you think it's like an offset, just shifting the balance forwards and backwards. It's how much brake balance do you have? How much of the front brakes you're using initially when you push the brakes, how much of the front brakes you're using as you're bleeding off the brakes. that has a huge impact on the car balance in turning. So people think of brake balance as like stopping the car. Brake balance is stopping the car and turning the car. Because basically, if you're using a whole load of rear brakes, you're actually removing how much lateral potential that tire has. So you're helping the car rotate at the detriment of your tires, because you're basically doing more work to rotate the car. You've also got the differential, which is pretty powerful, which they don't seem to talk about it too much, but it's definitely something that they're using a lot. The differential in the Formula One car is hydraulically controlled with electronic maps to do all sorts of different things. Those were my bread and butter. Basically, those two systems was the brake balance and the differential as a performance engineer. Those were, because you can change those through qualifying, you can change those through the race, and you need to make sure that you have the right scope and balance in those maps to accommodate a qualifying run at one limit and a race run when your tires are running out at the other limit.
And I might have completely made this up, so I don't mind looking stupid, but haven't you also got these brake maps? Is it right that depending on the amount of force that the driver's putting through the brake pedal, that will actually change how much brake balance? If I'm lightly braking, it might send more to the back or whatever. If I need to completely...
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so how does that... So how many of these maps are there, and how does this driver understand what he needs to do?
You kind of come up with a system, like, so that there's... I'm going to... Don't let me go down the rabbit hole in this one. Basically, there's five shape maps. So that thing that you described of, like, if you're pushing a little bit, it's this much brake balance to the front or rear. And if you're pushing super hard. So what that is effectively trying to do is target, one, the ideal brake balance. Because when you brake super hard, you've got a lot of load on the front axle, so the front brakes can do a lot of work. And as you bleed off the brakes in a Formula One car, as you're losing downforce, you shift that balance rearwards as you're bleeding off the brakes. Now, how much rearwards you shift it depends, or how rearwards you shift the brakes determines the balance of the car as you turn the car in. So yeah, you've got 5 of those maps. You can offset those maps as far forwards or rearwards as you'd like, and any combination of, you remember Brake Magic from Baku?
Yeah, of course. Lewis.
That was a toggle button which applied a huge brake balance offset on one of those maps. So it not only had a forward map, it didn't have much migration as you bleed off the brakes, but it was also very forward in order to heat up the front brakes and tires and not put too much heat into the rear tires for race restarts. That accidentally got toggled on, and that was Brake Magic. So you can push a button which changes that. You can change a rotary, or you can use the buttons up and down to move it. So it's nuts.
Well,
there's a lot going on.
I would just tell you, Blake, as someone we've just met, and Rob, someone I've known, I actually have a brake map for my wife's car. It's binary. It's always on or always off, and there's no in between. And whenever she drives, whenever you get near a stop sign, it is, if you're in the front, you will be eating the dashboard. Yeah, exactly. It's like there's no in between. But
yeah, I think Williams ran one of those recently, and the rear brakes caught on fire.
The brakes caught on fire a lot on the Williams recently this year.
Don't quote me.
Speaking of this year actually, and what you're seeing, I'd be curious your thoughts on the 2022 season so far. Things that maybe have surprised you, things that have confused you. I mean, you obviously have a keener eye than the rest of us. So as you watch, like, so far, what has been outstanding to Blake?
Well, I will say this: there's a lot of casual observers that pick up on stuff that I don't like. I'm not tuned in to look at, and they'll say something. I'm like, wait, really? I don't know that. Like, a lot of this stuff I don't remember or notice at all. So it's actually super cool to hear you guys' thoughts. But I guess the first part is 2 things. 2022 is a regulation as a whole. One, I think they've done a good job, and they've also done some bad things as well. But the good job they've done is the cars can follow more closely. But one thing I talked about in one of my videos recently was nobody's really talking too much about the Pirellis. I mean, these things you saw if you watched the Canadian Grand Prix, when we had stints where Leclerc on Ocon for 15 laps, unable to overtake him, fine. But he's up his rear that long. We haven't seen that in a while. Usually it's like, oh yeah, you get 5 laps to maybe attack him and then your tires are dead. No, we're not seeing that. Signs on Max on the final
13
race,
laps, yeah.
Both using all of the track flat out. I think it's phenomenal. Now, the downside of this is we've got new regulations, and some people get it right, and Mercedes have really struggled, and it sucks because they they are one of the most competent, capable teams. They've just been caught out by something, and they get a lot of like. It's super divisive, the press on Twitter and everything else. But let's be honest. Lewis is spectacular. George is very impressive. I'm not gonna say I'm surprised that he's that good, but it's just I think it's just off-putting seeing Lewis, trying to figure this car out and looking not particularly excellent all the time. But come on, he's not a joker. But the shakeup of the grid has been an unfortunate side effect of new regs.
Yeah, I mean, me and Brian have discussed this on previous episodes, which is that like last year when we were looking forward to the new regs, we just wanted. It would be great to not have Mercedes dominance. It'd be great to have more cars competing for wins. And we've kind of got the Mercedes have dropped off from the dominance point of view, but we're kind of really only looking at Red Bull and Ferrari, and then everyone else is fighting for best of the rest. Where do you see, and maybe if you've got any insight into this, but there's kind of reports that Red Bull have already maybe used a lot of their development budget, so they're making hay while the sun shines, and other cars, we might well see that gap close as things go on. Is that?
I hope so.
I was going to say, is that ridiculous optimism, or do you think that Red Bull it's theirs to lose now, and Max is going to drive off into the sunset?
Looking analytically, looking at where the other teams are in terms of pace, they're going to have let's put it this way: in qualifying outright, Mercedes is roughly 1% off. That's a huge gap. It's monstrous. I think the car probably has the potential, and they've pinned themselves in a corner with their suspension design, not letting them get the most out of the car. But also the window that they developed the car for, they can't run it there. So how fast will it be once they get around this? I don't know. McLaren next best up. I just don't see it happening. I want to be optimistic. I want to see 3, 4, 5 teams fighting but they're not consistent enough and not quick enough. And the McLaren, they keep coming together with decent results. But if you look at the amount of points they've scored, it's not looking great. Daniel having a tough time, Lando seeming to be more comfortable, but the car's not quick, and they've got to figure it out. They've got a lot of really intelligent, bright people that need to go figure out the dark arts of race car and find 1.4% of lap time, which is huge. 1.4% is massive.
Yeah.
So we've got Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes cementing themselves, coming back in no man's land, and then there's best of the rest, and then there's the sheds at the back. Is how it is. So will it converge by the end of the season? I actually honestly don't think so. Just looking at how much time and money, and considering that they're operating a race car flat out under budget restrictions, will Red Bull run out of, let's say, will they run out of development? Maybe. But does that mean that Ferrari's going to run out of development? Maybe. If they stand still, is Mercedes going to catch up? I mean, it's possible, but is McLaren or is Alpine going to come up hunting for them this season now? No
so
way. I'd love to be surprised, honestly, but I just don't see it.
We have we've somehow gotten into a debate about Haas frequently, and we were both. Actually, I should give Rob credit. He was more optimistic than I coming into this year. He thought they'd have points and more than 0 as they had last year, but actual points, and they did, and they've had some competitive races. K-Mag has looked good at times, and obviously Mick is on the bad luck train now that he finally had an opportunity. But the question I'd have is, I got on board early with the excitement around Haas, and I was excited for the car that they developed for 307 years in a row, to the detriment of all other teams and cars along the way. And now I'm worried that we have seen a bunch of DNFs. We've seen sort of lack of regular and routine pace out of the car at each track. And I know they had a great quali 5 and 6 in Canada.
That was spectacular.
But it was in the rain. It was a rain quali.
The equalizer.
I love it too. And I from now on I want a rain quali and dry race, but that's a different story. So
sign me up.
Yeah, sign me up. The question I'd ask is, do you think Haas has better days in front of them, or is it going to be tougher days in front of them? Meaning, do we anticipate them keeping up in the development war with the lower midfield, or should we see them slide back towards Williams and even maybe behind Aston Martin here as things go?
I'm not really sure that anybody at the back has made a whole lot of progress. I haven't really looked at their qualifying and pace. Race pace is so hard to actually boil down to a number, but qualifying pace, they're just inconsistent. I think you said it. They're just inconsistent, and I don't know if that's struggling to get on with the tires, if they have issues with brakes, which I know some teams in the past have had, issues getting brakes to work properly often, which you don't hear people talking about it, but it's actually a thing. Um, which the teams I've worked with didn't have those problems, but I know that other teams do have those problems. I think it's just inconsistency, struggling to understand the tires is what it looks like. Maybe there's different tracks and different characteristics when they need to run a bit stiffer and lower or whatever that just doesn't work out for them. Kevin looking pretty good. Mick fairly inconsistent, I think. I don't really know what to think about it. The Ferrari power unit also letting them down a couple of times, which is sad to see because this was Ferrari's championship. It's Ferrari's championship.
And that feels like they're just letting it go through just either, like you say, power units letting go, and then when the power unit doesn't let go, just strategy. I mean, again, from the outside looking in, everyone on Twitter, it's very, very toxic saying, oh, they're all idiots running strategy at Ferrari. Well, surely they can't be, right? But it does look like from the outside it looks like from the outside looking in that they're making some real stupid calls on strategy, but it's easy to be the armchair pundit, right?
Yeah, it is. I think Monaco was pretty bad, honestly. I get what they were doing, but it was so risky. Monaco, the rules of Monaco are track position is everything. And if it's wet, be on the right tires at the right time. And with Leclerc, they ignored both of those rules. And maybe Carlos had them over by saying, no, I'm going to stay out. But he wasn't looking too stupid, honestly. It was just the fact that when the Red Bulls got on those intermediates, they were rocket ships on those things. Yeah. And they got rearranged, and there they were. I don't know, man. I think honestly, the Ferrari power unit is pretty disappointing for everybody. I'm not. That's not me taking a dig at Ferrari fans either, because I think they've got the fastest car this season. Leclerc has been flawless in qualifying.
He's been amazing,
absolutely flawless. And Max has made quite a few mistakes. Some of them quite obvious mistakes, especially earlier in the season, like they cost tenths of a second. So. I think Haas are just kind of drinking some of that bad Ferrari, and then they've got their own problems as well with inconsistency and pace as well when the car is working. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate that very much, and that the view, and I know Rob does too. But I guess I'm curious now. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Blake. I mean, you're a content creator. I follow you on Twitter. It's a fantastic follow at Brrrake. There are 3 hours. Brrrake, you gotta follow him. But tell us a little bit about sort of your transition to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so my transition to actually doing motorsport content was much weirder than motorsport content. So I've been a gamer forever. COVID hits, I start playing Call of Duty Warzone online with all my buddies. I start uploading terrible Instagram clips, but you got to start somewhere. And I kind of use gaming content creation to cut my teeth and figure out the mechanics of making content, social media, editing. And that was great. And I was like, I knew I was at the end of my Formula One career. I wanted to take a break at least and try something different. I'd done it for 10 years. I feel like 10 years is a good amount of time to do something. I was like, right, I'll mix it up. I'll try something else. And then I was like, okay, I've got to do Formula One content. Like there's good journalists. There's good, like enthusiast experts, but there's not very many experts on YouTube and doing social media around Formula One. I was like, right, I'm going to do it. So that's been my full send for the last, realistically, since probably the start of the year. But I've started attacking TikTok. So Brrrake F1, Brrrake F1 on TikTok, and the same on YouTube. And those have been, I've just been putting all my time and effort into those. Live streaming on Twitch at Brrrake, not Brrrake F1, just Brrrake. Doing analytical content and just like kind of like you guys are doing with the podcast, just like building a community with an open mind. None of the toxic space like Twitter can be, where it's just people shouting into the void. It's like, no, come here and have a conversation. If you don't like somebody or something, like the data doesn't really care about people's opinions, basically. And if we can't use data to answer that question, we leave it up for debate and establish that it's opinion, and nobody can have a more correct opinion than someone else if the data isn't there to back it up. And that's kind of how I've taken an approach. And it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but my passion has always been for a very long time, Formula One and motorsports and analysis. And I write a bunch of code. I'm editing a lot of videos all the time to do, writing code to do analysis. And that has been me for the past 6 months now. And I feel like it's just getting started. And I'm having a lot of fun sharing, and stuff like with you, Rob and Brian, like sharing these conversations with other people that are enthusiastic about it. Because I think there's a really interesting negative narrative about new fans, which is, oh, you watch Drive to Survive, you're not a real fan. It's like, who cares? Who cares? It's like you and I, if you're new or if you're a veteran of the sport or whatever else, we like the same things. We have something in common. If you're new to the sport, don't gatekeep people. That's weird. Right. That's so weird. Like, share the love with people, man.
Yeah.
Like, if somebody who's been watching Formula One for 20 years listens to this episode and they're like, that was cool. And if there's somebody that's, doesn't even know what Formula is and listens to this episode and us talking about this and like how excited all of us are about this thing, I think that's something we're sharing.
Well, if a whole bunch of people leave the US to go over to the UK to take up Formula One engineering, then, we could have a new influx of a new crop of engineers coming your way.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, I probably answer, it's got to be 10 emails a week on how do I get a job in Formula One.
Wow.
Like that's my side hustle. Don't make any money off that. But like I didn't have anybody like that when I moved over here,
No, much respect for you for doing that. I mean, you and I have gone opposite ways over the pond, but I came here knowing a hell of a lot more about what I was going to be landing in when I got here. It sounds like you just took a punt on your future, backed yourself, and all credit for you on that one. So
doesn't always work out.
Well, it doesn't, but like you say, you can make your own luck. Now, in terms of kind of realizing your potential and making it to the top of the sport, then there's only really one thing left for you to do, which is to take part in our 100 seconds of DRS rapid fire quiz. I mean, that's really going to make your year. Yeah,
this is the pinnacle. This is the pinnacle.
This is it. So what
happens if I fail?
It's kind of really impossible to fail, but it's impossible. It's
Mission
literally just
successfully incoming.
So Brian's going to run a 100-second counter for us. It's literally a bunch of some F1 questions, some not. They're all kind of very simple. You'll get the hang of it, and there are no wrong answers. Okay. So,
good.
And also, just to be totally clear as well, there is no prize as well. You can't win anything here.
Okay, fine. So I'm not gonna. Wait, you should have told me that afterwards, because like I was a bit motivated to win like $100 or something.
$100? What are we made of money over here?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely win the title of best person called Blake to ever play 100 seconds of DRS.
Sign me up.
Okay, are you ready to run a timer for us, Brian?
I am prepared and ready and willing whenever you guys start. Blake, are you ready for this?
I'm thrilled. I'm so energized right now.
All right, I'm gonna count you guys in. Here we go.
I actually am. 3,
2, 1, begin, Rob.
Favorite Formula One track?
Spa-Francorchamps.
First poster you had on your bedroom wall?
Didn't have any posters on my wall.
Well, maybe there is a wrong answer.
Yeah.
Ferrari or Ford?
Ferrari.
Mario or Luigi?
Luigi.
If you were a member of the pit crew, which tyre would you change?
Front left.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Absolutely.
Favorite livery on an F1 car of all time?
The new Ferrari is so good. The new Ferrari is so good.
If you could add a James Bond type of gadget to an F1 car, what would it be?
Grease gun.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Favorite non-motorsport sport?
Cycling.
Favorite F1 driver of all time?
Schumacher.
If you could put two drivers from different eras head-to-head, which ones would you pick to race against each other?
Banjo and Lewis.
Oh, wow. That would be great.
Would you rather be chased by one horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses?
10 duck-sized horses.
Wet or dry race?
Wet.
Batman or Superman?
Batman.
I've got to ask this one for Brian. Tyres, interesting or not interesting?
Very interesting.
Yes.
And mysterious.
Yes.
Very mysterious.
I'm a tire guy.
What's your favourite cheese?
Gruyere.
Best racing movie of all time?
What's the one with Lauda?
Rush.
Oh, what's the one?
Rush,
yeah. It's pretty good. I don't watch that many.
And we are at time. You aced it, Blake. You aced it for sure. I love I loved your answers, but I just got to know, hot dog is a sandwich. We've had this debate both ways. Why do you say hot dog is a sandwich?
It's a piece of meat in between two pieces of bread, despite the bread being a continuous piece. It's it's a burrito's a sandwich, a hot dog's a sandwich. It's just not a complete, you know.
Yeah, we have this debate as well. I mean, you ever get like a hoagie roll and they slice it and it's still connected in the back? Isn't that the same kind of theory?
I think so. Does anybody not believe that?
Yes, we've had a handful of listeners, and I get their point as well because
I'm not going to argue with them, but it's like unless there's a mathematical proof to solve this, or some evidence based in science. I'm not gonna get mad about anybody's opinion, even though they're wrong. We agree. They're wrong.
Agreed. Well, the one that gets me going, and Rob didn't get a chance to ask it, is GIF or GIF?
GIF.
So, GIF, you said, with a hard G?
GIF.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's totally GIF. I mean, it's, yes, graphics interchange format or whatever the hell I forgot already it's called. But yes, GIF. Yeah. Thank you. That one gets me riled up because even though the guy once said it was GIF, he was drunk. So,
what does he know?
Yeah, he just made it. All right. Yeah, Rob.
Yeah. No, I think unfortunately we have to bring a close to this. It's been it's actually obvious as well that you could talk for hours on this, and I think that probably you and Brian at some point need to meet up and talk about tires in a dark room.
I'm allergic to tires. Honestly, as dark and mysterious as they are, I'm actually allergic to them.
He's just passing on the invitation, is what it is. He heard about some dark room with me, and he's like, "No, I don't like tires anymore."
Anyway, trying to wrap this up, Brian. Come on, stay with me.
Yeah, sorry.
So, thank you ever so much for making time to do this, Blake. Really, really appreciate kind of having someone that's been out there on the pit wall or at the races, giving their view. It's been great.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Blake. Thank you so much. And you kind of described how to follow you. I mentioned your Twitter account. Definitely a great follow. Everyone should do that. I do it. It's amazing. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon, all right?
Well, I hope we do speak to you soon, Blake, because that was absolutely awesome. I did feel like I was maybe a bit of a gooseberry there with the two nerds going over statistics, but, whatever. We've got to give Brian some loving sometimes. So, although it was quite funny when Blake swerved the invitation to go and get locked in a dark room and talk tires with you, that was awkward. That was actually Lando and Danny awkward, if I'm honest.
Well, but we also did hold the torpedo sound, which I don't usually do sounds during proper interviews, so we'll get this in.
Well, I came like a torpedo.
By the way, just before we move on to the next piece, what's it with calling it a channel today all the time?
I don't know. We're not? Tell me we aren't, and then I'll stop.
You normally refer to it as the pod, but now it's a channel. But, whatever. We can roll with it.
All right.
Right, so this week we have a double DRS detection zone. So we've already had Blake take part in DRS, which was cool to have him run through that. But we also have another listener as well. So we spoke to... actually, I'm not going to give it away. Let's hand over, or I'm going to hand over back to myself and listen in on the second DRS of the week.
Okay, we've had the Hills. We've had the Villeneuves, we've had the Verstappens, and now to add to the list of famous father-son combinations in the world of Formula One, we are excited to welcome Nimrod Abramovich, the son of Azriel, who we did 100 seconds of DRS on previously. So, welcome, Nimrod.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's nice to meet you. Welcome to the dirty side. So, we got a chance to talk a little bit with your dad and understand some of his F1 passion over the years that came and went. I'd love to know, how did you get into F1 and where did you find kind of that excitement and enthusiasm for it?
I started watching F1 back in 2014, the Rosberg-Hamilton crash in Spa, where Rosberg basically admitted to hitting Hamilton, kind of started something where I thought, hold on, this is interesting. And then I proceeded to watch the next race in Monza and basically watched the Hamilton masterclass as he worked his way back up from sixth and forced Nico Rosberg into a mistake, and from there on I was hooked. I'm not sure what about it was, but I always liked cars in general, and I am a very competitive person. I love go-karting, so it made sense, and since been loving it.
Oh, it's amazing. So you like karting? That's fascinating because I have a theory, and I'd like your perspective on it. And since I am the benefit of seeing you, which the listeners cannot, you are a fit person. I am not as much. And so is there a weight disadvantage as someone who carries a couple extra pounds into a go-kart? And if you believe there might be, should there be weights that can be added to lighter person's cars to make it an even playing field? I'm asking for a friend, not for me.
I mean, as someone who weighs around 60 kilograms and is lighter than some of his friends that goes go-karting with, I'm inherently biased to say absolutely no disadvantage of being heavier, and therefore there should be absolutely no weights added to go-kart because it favors me. So yeah.
So that's a good answer. You just so you know, when you come to SAP's go-kart theme park, we will have the weight situation taken care of. So just be prepared for when that happens. But yeah.
I'll beat you anyway.
I'm sensing some real kind of running resentment here, Brian.
Yeah, I got to get this guy named Fireball on the podcast one time because he beat me once, and I think it's because I had 60 pounds on him, but that's a different story.
So definitely nothing to do with your driving skill. It's just all to do with weight, right? So if everything was equalized, you would have kicked him, yeah?
I don't even think it's up for debate, but not enough about me. Enough about me. So Nimrod, now one other question I have for you before we get to the 100 seconds is, as you look at today's drivers, I'd be curious who you think is kind of the best driver out there if all things were equal. So if you put everybody in the same cars or carts or whatever it may be, but in an equal vehicle, who do you think would come in first?
Verstappen seems to have some natural talent in it that I don't think anyone else seems to get. I get to the same level, but I don't like Verstappen. So I'm going to go off the Top Gear result and say Daniel Ricciardo, because in the same vehicle, he beat Lewis Hamilton, who is a 7-time world champion. And I would probably say Lewis is only close to Max on that level. I think their talent is in different areas, though.
The old Suzuki Liana, I remember that.
That's a superb reference point. I'd completely forgotten about that. The star in the reasonably priced car. It's and then getting the F1 drivers in as well. You're right. That was the great equalizer, and I think we need to bring that back. Maybe Grand Tour need to steal it, and we need to get Clarkson and Co back on it again, and we need to get all the current F1 drivers in the same little sedan and see what they can do.
What you're doing it all wrong. What the dirty side needs to do is start our own event with our own car and our own track, and we should do it. Why are you giving it to the Grand Tour? This is what we should be doing.
Because we don't have any budget.
We'll fake it till we make it. I love Nimrod's idea, and as a Top Gear fan, I remember the blue Liana, so that's brilliant. All right, obviously, I mean, the highlight of your day is going to be the 100 seconds of DRS. You've already done all the chores in the kitchen. You've already watched the race and threw your hands up in disgust as Max won. But are you ready, Nimrod, for the 100 seconds of DRS?
I guess so.
That wasn't as resounding as I was expecting from you, sir, but we'll take it. Rob, are you ready to administer the questions?
Yes, I am. Are you ready to do the timing?
Probably not, but I'm going to give it my best shot. I have the timer ready. Gentlemen, in 3, 2, 1, begin.
If you could swap the cars out for another type of transportation, what would you like to see all the drivers racing in?
Double-decker buses.
Batman or Superman?
Batman.
DRS, good thing or bad thing?
Good.
Best thing to do on a rainy day?
Stay inside and play F1 games.
Ooh, nice. Best F1 driver of all time?
Senna.
Do you have any lucky superstitions?
No.
If you could add a James Bond-style gadget to an F1 car, what would it be?
I actually haven't watched any James Bond, but I like the Mario Kart banana thing.
Fair enough. Favorite musician or musical group?
Sabaton.
Favorite livery of all time on an F1 car?
This year's Williams.
Favorite F1 track?
Portimao.
What's your favorite cheese?
Cheddar.
Who's your favorite F1 driver on the grid right now?
Bottas.
Would you rather be chased by one horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses?
10 duck-sized horses.
If you could see two drivers from different eras go head-to-head, which would you like to see go to head?
Prost and Hamilton.
Oh,
nice.
That'd be fun.
Sleep in or get up early?
I'm a student to sleep in.
Favorite non-motorsport sport?
Road cycling.
And that is time. That is time. So well done, sir. Well done. But I have to ask one important follow-up question. You've never seen a James Bond movie?
No, they don't seem to pull me in. Man saves everything in a suit, all perfect. And no, now I'm more of a Mission Impossible type of guy.
I need
So
to
Mission
work with your
Impossible.
father. That's poor parenting that you weren't forced to watch all of Sean Connery and Roger Moore as a youngster.
He still is a youngster, Rob. We're old, is what the other side of that argument
I
is.
know, but he's now into that point where he gets to choose what he wants to watch. He's gone past that point where you have to watch what your parents make you watch, right? So
But
it's a
the
missed
Daniel
opportunity.
Craig ones are still good ones, and those are modern. And so, no, they are. So interesting. Well, I don't know if I'd start with the last Daniel Craig, but if you're ever bored and you feel like streaming something fun, check out his first one as Bond, Casino Royale. It's really quite good, I believe. But anyway, that was fascinating to me. I didn't. As someone who loves Top Gear and Bond, I thought we were the same guy here, Nimrod. And then you're like, I've never seen Bond.
Yeah,
Sorry to
that was a bit of a
disappoint.
shocker, to be honest. But never mind. And then as soon as I asked the whole get up early or stay in bed, I thought, yeah, I'm asking a student here. This is a ridiculous question.
I've just graduated, so actually I'm going to have to start waking up early for once my job begins. But
Oh, well,
I'll
congratulations
be-
on graduation.
Yes.
thank you. Well, assuming my exam results went all right, I have a job in August, so I'll have to be waking up in time for that rather than at 10 a.m. like today.
Well, congratulations on that. The Dirty Side salutes you. And thank you for doing this and for taking the time to share your perspectives on F1. It's been awesome having you on, Nimrod. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
We are really excited to have had Nimrod on. Thank you so much. That was fun. As always, if you're listening and interested in participating, please let us know on Twitter at F1DirtySide or at dirtysideofthetrack@gmail.com. And this week we're getting ready for Silverstone, which is so exciting. It's the British GP. And since Rob is, he's British, I don't know if you guys picked up on that, we're going to let him kind of run through what to expect this coming week.
Yep, I won't take too much time indulging on the British Grand Prix. I will just do the normal kind of preview that we do in terms of kind of a little bit of history of the circuit. So the British Grand Prix went back and forth between Silverstone, Brands Hatch and Aintree between 1950 and 1987, but since 1987 it's been at its home of Silverstone, which is an old RAF base from the 40s, which we'll come on to shortly in terms of some of the little nods to the past that the corner naming conventions has. In terms of the active drivers that we've got at the moment, we've actually only got 3 that have won here. We've got Lewis with 8 wins, and Vettel and Alonso have both got 2. So I'm not really sure there's much chance of one of those 3 adding to that this
I
time.
was shocked by that. Max has not won here?
No, and actually when we then look at the constructors, so out of the active constructors that we've still got running, Ferrari lead the way with 16, McLaren with 14, Williams with 10, Mercedes with 9, and Red Bull with 3. So I'm guessing that the 2 wins for Vettel were 2 of Red Bulls. I'm not sure actually. I need to look back to see if Vettel took one of those in a Ferrari. But yeah, looking at that again, I mean, I don't think there's. I think McLaren and Williams are going to be, and Mercedes are going to be very unlikely to add to those totals. So
Don't write Mercedes off just yet. But
I'm
long
not writing them off, I'm
shot, I know. But I mean, they may have 3 stabilizer bars on by then, assuming they can get their friend to approve another one. I got to just say this: a shout out to one of my favorite races of all time, the 2020 British Grand Prix. Coming out of COVID, getting so excited to watch live racing, go to Silverstone and watch the race on TV, obviously from there, and it was the best. Sometimes people complain about F1 not being close at the line. And, when they mean close, they mean like neck and neck, like some NASCAR races finish, right alongside each other. I loved the 2020 British GP. Go check it out, please. Check the highlights, because on the last lap, the leader, Lewis, has a front left blowout. I mean, the tire is flapping. And he is trying to finish the race in a hobbled car on 3 wheels with Max chasing him down. And the engineer in his ear, you can hear him giving the time to Max. And it's his voice and the urgency is rising as Lewis is getting near the line. It is tremendous. You got to check it out.
it was a great finish. And talking about kind of the finish then, so a little kind of wander around the Silverstone circuit. I'm not going to go and name every single corner here, but I just found an article that went down kind of some of the history behind some of the names on the corners. So one of the first corners, or the first corner, is Abbey Corner, named after a 12th century Luffield Abbey that the remains were discovered just north of the circuit. There you go. Aintree, that's a tip back to where the British Grand Prix used to be held, even though these days it's more associated with horse racing and the Grand National. Anyone in the US that doesn't know what the Grand National is, then again, go and check that one out. People think the Kentucky Derby is a big horse race. Go and watch a video of the Grand National. You'll have your minds blown. We got Luffield, which is the other half of Abbey. this one, maggots. I always just assumed this was something to do with fishermen and going and putting bait on their lines and going fishing with maggots. But which, with your confused look now, Brian, do you know what a maggot is?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with fishing. And you wrote here, not named for the things fishermen use, but rather a nearby moor.
Yeah, so
none of that makes sense to me.
Okay, so,
I know what a moor is only because I'm not an idiot, but none of what that says.
So,
makes
what do you
any
think
sense.
a maggot is then?
It's something that a little white bug that crawls out of raw meat or spoiled food.
Okay, so as a lad, if you were going to go fishing in the morning, you would go to the nearby bait and tackle shop and you would buy live maggots, a little tub of them, and you would go and thread them onto your hook.
You talking about worms?
Maggots.
Worms.
You can go fishing with worms as well, but maggots are also a well-known bait for fishing. There you go. You learn something new every day, Brian. Every day is a school day.
I fancy myself a fisherman, and I've never used a maggot. So
you've never gone fishing in a British river, then? Must be British fish. They like to bite on maggots. Anyway,
what am I going to catch there? I don't know. Anyway, something brown. I'm sure there's fish and
something
chips
amazing.
or something with terrible sauce.
Anyway, let's get back to Silverstone. Hanger Strait is then a nod to the airbase. Stowe. I didn't know what Stowe was. Apparently, it's a nearby private school that Richard Branson went to. So there we go. Then we come to the most illustrious corner on all of Silverstone, which is Vale Corner, which apparently is named after the co-host of America's leading F1 podcast.
If only people knew how much we paid to make that corner named after the dirty side of the tracks, Rob Vale. I mean, it is in the high millions. Like, we could have had the streaming rights for F1 in the States, but we let ESPN take it because we named it Vale.
Exactly. They had the foresight to name it so many years ahead of the podcast being launched. But it's fact. I mean, just go Google it. It's definitely named after me. Club Corner is a nod to the Royal Automobile Club, or as people know it back home, the RAC, as they have, I think, some headquarters nearby and got a long history with the sport. And then also that kind of rounds off the corners and the racetrack. But last but not least about the preview is that it's also the next round of Rob versus Brian the draft. I picked Silverstone out as one of my tracks, so we will be dusting off our rosters this week, taking a look at the fantasy points, and praying that I manage to beat Brian on my home track.
Well, we'll see. I wouldn't bet all the money on it, but we'll see what ends up happening.
But I think it's. I'm really looking forward to it next week. I've got to get in touch with the guy at the Iron Horse, but I think we're going to be doing another watch along. It's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern, so it's not too ridiculously early. So keep an eye on social media. If we are doing it, we'll throw it out on Instagram and Twitter, and hope to see some folk down there.
I was hoping it had kind of broken you, this early morning thing. I thought you were going to say it's not too ridiculously early, pause, for a beer. And I was going to say 10 a.m. is pretty early for a beer for most people, but you didn't say that, so you're still a normal human. I love it. Now go drink light beers.
This is later. I mean, the other race was an 8 a.m. start, I think, Monaco, and I was on the beers then. So this is 10 a.m. I mean, this is almost lunchtime.
Oh, amazing. Well, as always, we just wanted to say thanks to everybody for listening. We are so excited for the British Grand Prix next week. We will obviously be back next Sunday with a recap of the race. Just thanks so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, tell a friend.